Hello and welcome back to When Life Feels Messy. I'm one of your wonderful hosts, Ashley Barrera.
And I'm your other wonderful host, Erin Raspberry.
Welcome back, wonderful listeners. It's been a minute. It's been a hot
Been
minute.
a hot minute. Yes, emphasis on hot.
Emphasis on hot. Yes. The last episode we had was in June.
That's so crazy because it
I
feels like yesterday.
know, I know.
But
But
we're excited to be back.
yes, we're excited to be back for episode 21.
Wow.
And
21?
mhm.
Heck. Oh my gosh. Wow.
And we have a treat. We have a special treat.
Mm, three treats.
Yes, I love your treats. In this episode, we have a wonderful, wonderful special guest,
Yay.
Miriam Reynolds.
Woo! Can we insert
Woo!
the applause noise?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we're so excited that she is joining us on this episode, and I think it's gonna be a good one. Not to be biased, but she's awesome, so you're gonna love her.
Hmm.
Um, so we're going to give just a little brief intro on who Miriam is, in case you don't know, and if you don't, you're about to get some learning. But Miriam is a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Texas and a registered art therapist, and we are very lucky that she serves as our assistant director for the Dallas and Houston campuses and is
Hey.
our awesome supervisor and advocate. And we are so thankful that she is taking time to be on this podcast. Just a little info about her education and background. So she received her BFA from the University of North Texas and then a master's degree in counseling psychology and art therapy from Naropa University. Wow, I got that right on the first try. In Boulder, Colorado, which I bet they have way better weather than we do right now. Little envious, but okay. Miriam has worked in the mental health field since 1996 in areas such as residential treatment, juvenile justice diversion, college counseling, and private practice. And her clinical interests include creative expression of emotions, ADHD management, anxiety, performance issues, imposter syndrome, and trauma. And we have her today to talk about, drum roll, ADHD. And so we're so excited that she's joining us to give us all the info on it because this is something I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Ash and Miriam, but I just feel like there's still so much uncertainty and taboo-ness about ADHD that like we're still just like learning so much about. And I know for me growing up, like ADHD was definitely coined as like you didn't discipline enough for it. And it was
Hmm.
just like something too that like I literally think about all the time of like how many people were literally treated horribly and just not even like shown an ounce of the care and support they needed. Um, so it is just like a whole thing, like full circle coming back to, but I'm so
Hmm.
excited to learn so much more about it today, Miriam. And so why don't we get started and just kind of turn the mic over to you right now, and maybe you can just give our listeners a little snippet about what exactly is ADHD, and we'll start there.
Sure. Well, I want to start first by thanking you guys for inviting me on. I love talking about this. It really is one of my very favorite things to talk about. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of misinformation. And so just any opportunity to talk about it, I'm happy to do that, of course. Um, and then yeah, I do want to share a little bit about why I'm so interested in it, if that's okay, if we could start
Mm-hmm.
with that. I just, I always say that somebody should study my family because we have four living generations of folks with ADHD in my family right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild. It's just absolutely wild. Um, and it's just, honestly, I don't think we even like realized this until maybe the last 10 or 15 years just in my family. We didn't realize.
Wow.
Um, I remember at one point my dad talking to me about my children's medication and him saying to me, like, I didn't even know this was a thing. I just thought this was the way I was. And him having this like full circle moment where he was like, oh my God, this is how we all are. You know,
Wow.
it was,
Yeah.
it was kind of intense. And he was well, I mean, so my dad's like 92 now. So he was, if this
Wow.
conversation was like 10 or 15 years ago, he was still really advanced in age to be saying that.
Right. Yes.
Hmm.
That's a long time to just feel like
Right. Like,
unaware. Yeah.
so you know, yeah, I know a lot of people say like that their children are their biggest teachers. And
Hmm.
I would say in
Yeah.
this particular case, that is 100% accurate. Also not uncommon. I mean, I talked to lots of women who don't get diagnosed until their children do. That's a really common
Hmm.
thing. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I do think that there's a lot of that, but my children were particularly hyperactive, um,
Right.
like extremely so, like
Mm.
like interrupts, kind of educational processes and stuff like that. So um, we chose to do medication really early with them, and that has a lot of, we could talk more about that later, but that has a lot of, kind of issues that come along with it. So,
Hmm.
including a lot of judgment and a lot of, like questioning and a lot of like what you said, Aaron, about people thinking like it's a lack of discipline
Hmm.
kind of thing. Um, but just to tack along with that onto that is there's been a lot of kids that were, I think, overly disciplined, if not abused
Hmm.
because of this. And so I do think it's important. I mean, yeah, to just have
Right.
conversations about it.
Yeah. I love what you brought up about hearing and seeing a lot of women that like figured out, right? Like once their children were diagnosed, right, or started exhibiting, similar symptoms of like one, I could imagine that process being like, oh wow, like so validating on one hand of like this makes sense, like now I know kind of thing, but the other hand being like I wasn't given that, right, when I was growing up, or that wasn't even something that was like noticed or aware. And so I literally became a parent and then saw my children doing it. Like, I would imagine that that would be just an interesting process to, like, especially finding out like later in life kind of thing. Kind of like with your dad, like, of
Mm.
like, man, like how much of my life was spent like not even knowing, right? Like this was like going on. And I'm sure there came a lot of like even just like self-perception things about like why do things feel different, right? Or like how
Mhm.
I'm comparing myself to like my peers or like other people in general. So, so interesting. Hmm.
Did you notice like a difference between how like it presented in you versus your kids?
Oh,
Absolutely. That's a
yeah.
great question. Well, let's just jump into that. I mean, obviously well, not obviously, but there's inattention, hyperactivity,
Hmm.
impulsivity, though all of those kind of are both with all three types of ADHD, which is inattentive type and hyperactive type, and then combined. I would say most people are combined, but in my case, um, my children were extremely physically hyperactive. And so it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even a question. Like the diagnosis was so simple. A doctor looked at them for, 5 minutes
Right.
and was like, oh my God. Like, I think they count movements. They
Mm-hmm.
count how many movements an average child does and how many movements a hyperactive child does. And it's just, I mean, I remember the doctor sort of like watching one of my kids and being like, that amount of movement is not, that's not, well, he said normal. We don't, we might not say it that way now because I think we understand ADHD is more of a neurotype than a disorder. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I definitely want to highlight in talking to y'all today is just that it is just a difference, more so than it is a problem to be solved.
Right.
It's not something obviously that has a cure. The way someone is not something that's changeable, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I do think that this type of brain is, can serve a function in society just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think along with it comes just a tremendous amount of creativity a lot of times, um, really just interesting ways of thinking and problem solving and being inventive and, just like entrepreneurial and yeah. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely got like its kind of superpower aspects, but in my kids' cases, they were not able to learn, um,
Mm-hmm.
because they were not able to sit in their seat.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and then, I mean, we could argue that it was a learning environment that was the problem, not the kids, right? I mean, we could argue that too, that like if they were in a,
Hmm.
learning environment where they were allowed to move and not expected to sit still, maybe, their kind of natural intelligence or their learning would have happened. Um, and they're both doing fine and, could compensate for it, but it was a
Mm-hmm.
struggle. I mean, it was a struggle when they were little. Um,
Mm-hmm.
both of them got, I mean, I don't know why I'm going into this much detail, but both of them got like, kicked out of preschools. They were just
Yeah.
very difficult to manage. And I'm saying like preschools, multiple preschools.
Mhm.
Just really struggled until we figured out how to get a hold of it, and kind of get a
Right.
handle on it. But it was like a part-time job, you know what I mean? Trying to figure
Yeah.
this out when they were little. But anyway, with
Mm.
that came a lot of understanding that the adults in the family also got, and a lot of healing. But kind of what you're saying, Erin,
Right.
about people like looking back and looking at their childhood and being like, oh, this could have been explained. I do think that there's
Mhm.
a little bit of like, maybe even like a little grief process that happens.
Mm.
Like back and you're like, oh my God, if I would have known this sooner, like
Right.
I could have felt differently about myself.
Mhm.
And
Exactly.
I do always say, I'm going to try to remember the things that I always say about this when I'm talking about, but I do always say that like the self-esteem is probably the worst. The
Mhm.
hit that it takes on someone's self-esteem is probably the worst part of dealing with ADHD, honestly.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, And I cannot stress that enough. So, and when I'm talking to therapists, I'm like, please treat the self-esteem aspects of this. And when I'm talking to clients, I'm like,
Mhm.
is that a judgment that you have on, about
Mhm.
yourself that we can kind of look at a different way when we know that it's attributed to this? And yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. That it makes me think of something you said a little bit ago about even just the process of coming to terms with it's not something that is a disorder, right? And like we're fixing it because something's wrong with you, right? It's like a big part of it is like the acknowledgement and even just like the embracing of like this is like how my brain operates, right? Like this is a different way to function than the right, like the whole norm that people would like to throw around, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? Like it doesn't mean that like then there's like this lesser aspect, which I think is still something that a lot of people kind of experience. And I've seen that a lot too, just with like students, right? They either know they've been diagnosed, right? Or they have suspicions about it, is like you said, the self-esteem piece is like a huge element of it. Like feeling like they don't compare to peers, like feeling like they're not as smart or they're not able to retain the information and things the same way. Um, and so I feel like that's been a big thing of trying to challenge in the therapy session with clients, is just that aspect of it feels like we're fighting against like ourselves versus like almost being able to like zoom out, embrace, right? Like how we function because we're all unique and then being able to like move forward without feeling like, well, I don't check mark all these same things that someone else does, so I must not be like as good, right, in X, Y, and Z ways. So I'm glad you brought that up because that is something I'm seeing a lot more in session. Especially with, I feel like our population, like even just here at TWU, like I'm seeing that a lot, right? Of like individuals that either like are already like aware that that's like what they have and that um being medicated or already being diagnosed with that and then coming in and being like, hey, like I think I want to be like evaluated in that part of it. So it's very interesting of just like how much I'm seeing of that even within like the last couple of years and also just so enlightening of like hearing about you talk about this and even in the staff retreat we did when you did our little presentation because it's so much more eye-opening than I was ever taught about it in grad school or prepared for it as a therapist. So I appreciate your insight.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share. I do want to just kind of for the record state that a lot of the opinions that I have, I don't even know how I got them. So I'm
Mm.
just gonna like basically like thank the collective wisdom, of all of the doctors and therapists that I've ever worked with in my whole career and my children and my family and school and everything else. Cause I feel like this is, you know, I think when you've been doing this as long as I have, like I don't even know how I know this. I just know it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
just want to say that. Like I know that I learned about this. I learned different aspects of this all the time,
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And I do think like, this is one area where I think social media has been particularly helpful in kind of educating the public. I do,
Mm-hmm.
I do love me some psychology TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the stuff that I've seen, honestly, is like very accurate. So I haven't seen a lot of things that I'm like, oh my God, people are disseminating misinformation. It's usually super accurate and very
Right.
helpful, I think, for people to be aware of other people's experiences and, and even to hear from mental health providers, which there's a ton of those out there, putting out content. And I guess this is an example of that.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's great. It does make it look like there's a lot more people than there were before.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's more people getting diagnosed, but I don't think there's more people than there were before.
Right.
I think just when
Yeah.
people have more awareness and people are like, and have more information, they can go get
Mhm.
treatment, and then that looks like there's more people.
Yes. That is so interesting that you say that because it makes me think of something that I think I've been hearing a lot more since COVID. Like, just because, like, I think in COVID, we really ramped up with like the social media therapists, like psychology, and just like information flooding about all different types of mental health things. But I've heard a lot more about just a criticism of like, oh, well, yeah, like they just, heard about ADHD, so now they're diagnosing themselves and think they have it. And it reminds me of, I don't remember when exactly it was, but I remember there was like this phase when there like was increasingly more like LGBT like visibility and just like awareness. And then it was this whole thing of like, oh, well, of course, like they're jumping on the bandwagon now they're gay or whatever. And it's
Social
like,
contagion, they call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
right. And it's like actually like how much of that is because there is the awareness and the knowledge that people are actually learning about themselves and trying to be aware of just like different parts of themselves that now we're just hearing a lot more people acknowledge that rather than people are just jumping on a bandwagon, right? Like, hmm.
So I want to tell you guys about this. There's a lot of overlap between autism and ADHD too, and
Mm-hmm.
we're classifying both of those things as neurotypes now, and maybe some other ones too. I've heard anxiety be classified as a neurotype recently too.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yes.
fascinating to me,
Mm-hmm.
actually, because like, what if the brain is just that way? You know what I mean? And that like, and that's not anyway. That we could go off into that. That's another podcast. Um,
Yeah.
but with the overlap, um, oh no, sorry, I remember what I was going to say. I took a training with Dr. Devin Price, who's a nationally recognized expert in autism.
Hmm.
And they said the most interesting thing in the training. They said if someone thinks that they have autism, they probably have it. And there's not like necessary to do a test. And they said it's the same as when someone knows that they're gay, that they don't need to take a test for that. They just know that. That's what they said about autism. And I'm wondering if the same thing
Mm.
doesn't apply with this. If someone thinks they
Right.
have it, I have never had someone come into my office and think that they had it and they were just completely wrong.
Hmm.
I have had the issue where we couldn't tell if it was ADHD or if it was anxiety or if it
Hmm.
was trauma. That's a very common thing. But I have
Hmm.
never had someone come in my office and be like, I really think I have ADHD. And me be like, absolutely not. You're not even close. Like they're always right.
Yeah.
They're always right. So I
Wow.
don't know that again that the social contagion thing is happening. I'm sure it could happen. I'm
Hmm.
sure it could. But like I
Right.
don't that's not what I see day to day. What I see are a
Hmm.
lot of undiagnosed folks. That's what I see day
Right.
in, day out. And a lot of people that are like, what is wrong with me that I can't remember this, or that I can't organize myself, or that I wait till the last minute to do everything. That's what I
Hmm.
hear day in,
Yeah.
day out.
Right.
So then people that are just coming in being like, I need some Ritalin. I think I have ADHD. Like that's not that's
Hmm.
not been my experience. Even with working
Right.
with college kids who are notorious,
Hmm.
apparently notorious for, med seeking these types of medications, which I haven't had that experience either. But it
Right.
makes it really hard to get them because there's that perception. It's
Hmm.
hard for someone who's not previously diagnosed to get it. Anyway,
Right.
that's kind of another topic, but yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's like a whole other like episode, I feel like, but so interesting. Huh. Okay, well, not to like totally derail us on that. Maybe we can kind of like pivot a little bit since
Mhm.
talking about, just potential like getting diagnosed, right? Like I think a big question that I see a lot coming in is like what even that process is. Like, is there an evaluation? Like, and I know you kind of have an interesting perspective and take that I think would be really helpful for listeners to hear on it as someone who not just personally, right, but like also with your children and with other family members has kind of seen, right, this whole process of being diagnosed come out?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I I am by no means against psychological testing. That is not what I'm trying to say. But in this
Hmm.
particular case, it's usually not necessary. And I'm going to say usually because I'm going to leave some room for that because when there is differential diagnosing that's happening, there is absolutely a need for testing. I just don't think it's necessary for every single person to be, to
Mm,
do a computer test or a full battery of psychological testing in order to be diagnosed with this. It's not hard to spot.
right.
It's just not. Like you could do a clinical interview, you could do a thorough clinical interview and have at least a working diagnosis by the end of that interview. And,
Yeah.
people might be like, well, that's just, that's like not a great practice. But honestly, I don't, that's really what I think about this. I don't think this is super mysterious unless there's the
Mhm.
cases of the overlap and we can't tell if it's
Mm.
anxiety or trauma or ADHD. That's when,
Right.
but I mean, we would do that with anything. When there's a diagnosis that's unclear, that's exactly when we refer to testing most of the
Hmm.
time, right? Like that's when
Yeah.
it's really indicated that someone get it. But testing is so not accessible, right? Like there's few insurance companies that cover it. It's really expensive. It's really time consuming. It's hard to find people that are experts in it. Well, no,
Yeah.
not experts in testing. Those are everywhere. Psychologists can do that anywhere. I meant sort of just like experts in ADHD.
Right. Right. Yes.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I know there's some computer tests that have been, kind of created to where it tests someone's impulsivity. Like they're whatever. They're supposed to click on something and they're supposed to wait. And sometimes, like if you have ADHD, you can't. I just don't think that's. I don't think that's where this is at. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think a
Mm-hmm.
clinical interview, um, is is enough. Dare I say that to the public? I think it's enough. Um,
Yeah.
and I do think with kids it's a little bit different, right? We do a teacher survey, we do a parent survey,
Right.
we talk to the kid. There's a little bit more that happens and with children getting diagnosed. With adults, I
Mhm.
think I wonder if it could be the same process. Like ask your partner, have your partner fill something out and have
Yeah.
you fill something
Yes.
out and maybe your employer or whatever. That would be really fascinating.
Oh,
If that
yeah.
were the case.
There's been so many times I've seen a couple in session and one partner will point out like the symptoms of like, okay, I see you like, waiting to the last minute to do this for our whole relationship. And like the other partner's like, that's just my personality. Like, that's just what I've been doing. And it's like your partner or someone that you're living with has that like very intimate, consistent access to like you and your behavior. It get pointed out too.
Y'all, I said literally today, I said to someone today, that procrastination is a fine method of getting stuff done. Like waiting to the
Hmm.
last minute is a fine method of getting stuff done, as
Mm-hmm.
long as you're able to get it done. And most of
Right.
the time, what I'm seeing with, college students anyway that have ADHD, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, they feel horrible that they wait till the last minute to do it, but
Hmm.
they get it done. They're doing well. There's no
Hmm.
problem with it other than maybe they don't sleep the night before or it causes a little extra stress or they judge it. That's actually the problem. Like,
Hmm.
what if they just said, this is how I get things done and I'm going to get it done and it's going to be fine and there's no issue here? And I know that's really controversial and that's usually the first time people have ever heard that because they're coming in all apologetic, almost all
Hmm.
ashamed that they wait till the last minute. And I'm like,
Yes.
there is a biological reason why that works.
Right.
Know that
Yeah.
adrenaline is one of the best hormones ever to help us focus. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what
Hmm.
it does. That's literally what it does. So
Yeah.
there's a good reason why people do that. All that
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline when you're waited to the last minute just makes you hyper focused and you get it done and you get like 10 hours worth of work done in, 2 hours or whatever. So
Hmm. Yes. Oh my gosh, that makes me think of Lorinda. Gonna spotlight my wife here for a second. Of we like throughout our relationship, something that I have seen is a big shift even of how she mentally approaches her procrastination. Of like when we met in college, it was very much the judgy, like of like, this is my like habit almost, right? Of like I procrastinate, I wait to the last minute, but it was very much like still like the anxiety, stress piece of it, the judginess. And now like almost 8 years in, she's at the point of like very much like awareness and acceptance around her procrastination to the point of like I'll be like, hey, are you gonna do this? And she was like, I do my best work when I'm under the pressure. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can't fault you for the awareness, but also like it stresses me out. So then it's like a whole thing. But
Yeah, like I'm now the source of the pressure.
yes. Like,
Ew.
oh.
Ew.
Oh, yes, I took that on. That's lovely. I'm gonna have to add that to my repertoire, I guess.
So what I'm hearing is like the um like hyperactivity and like the inattentiveness is like the two big signs for
And
people to
impulsivity.
like impulsivity too, or like the big signs for people to be aware of.
I think those are maybe like the buckets.
The
I
buckets.
don't know if those are the signs. The
Okay.
signs are really interesting and very like not clinical a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and just a quick word about hyperactivity. A lot of times people are hyperactive in their brain and not their body. And so it's easy to miss it, especially when they're little.
Oh my
You can
gosh.
be a hyperactive thinker.
Yeah, that's so great to
Oh,
point out.
God. I feel like I just had a light bulb moment, Miriam.
Yeah, no,
Like,
Hmm.
for real, because like I think we see it as like a little boy in school who's, squirreling around and poking people and whatever. And there are definitely those people. But I think little girls oftentimes get missed because they're inattentive or they're quiet or their
mhm.
hyperactivity is silent. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So Ashley, what were you about to say? Because I was saying the buckets, the inattentive, the hyperactive, and the impulsive. What were you going to say about that?
I was gonna like ask you what are some like other like big signs or like symptoms that can help people really like notice that about them versus just
Mm-hmm.
make it versus like internalize it and like harm their self-esteem or their self-image. Like
So,
kind of help them like pull that apart.
yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. This is where TikTok has been really interesting too, because a lot of these really like common things that people do are very diagnostic. They really are, but it's not a clinical diagnosis. It's like
Mm-hmm.
what would your partner say is annoying about you? Always losing your keys, running late,
Gosh.
forgets things, right? Unorganized, waits till the last minute, right? Like that stuff is diagnostic. It really is, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's these things that don't look, how we think they're supposed to. People aren't getting things done in the way, that we think they're supposed to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it bothers people. It bothers neurotypical sometimes, right? To watch
Mm-hmm.
someone zoom around and do things in a weird way, or
Mm-hmm.
like we just said, like wait till the last minute and like, oh my God, it's not gonna get done. And the person's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna get done, like I'll get it done, right? Or like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
I have a phrase, or my husband has a phrase when I'm like trying to plan and like I need the exact order of things and like structure and like a plan or a list. And his phrase is, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And I'm like, I'm trying to figure it out right now. He's like, but it doesn't need to be figured out right now. And I was like, in my brain, it does need to be figured out right now,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's a few months from now or X like a long period of time from now, or not like urgent.
Mm-hmm.
So like that phrase of we'll figure it out. It's gonna be okay. We're gonna figure it out. I'm just like, yeah.
Yes.
But that's like I've noticed like his ADHD symptoms like go to that to help like calm and regulate and not like
Mhm.
put that in the forefront of his mind because something else is going on more immediate. And then
Mm.
he'll figure it out in the moment.
One of my therapist buddies used to use this phrase all the time. She had ADHD as well, and she would say, "Now or not now." And so your
Mm-hmm.
your hubby is like saying, "It's not now,
Mm-hmm.
right? We'll figure it out." And you're like, "No, no, no, we need to have a plan." And he's like, "No, but it's not now."
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that's a really interesting kind of way to look at it. Thank you,
Hmm.
Rhonda from Juvenile Diversion, who taught me that a long time ago. But just now and not now is a very like that. That's a very interesting kind of just a perspective to have when looking at someone who's having, you know, planning issues.
Hmm.
That's because that's one of the characteristics, right?
Hmm.
not being able to like organize and plan ahead of time. That's the thing.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Mm.
Wow, wow, wow.
Mhm.
It makes me think of this is like TMI, but makes me think of something I really struggle with is like if I think of like an idea or like a craft or like redecorating or like something that I want to do, but I don't necessarily have the time for it. It's like it feels like I have to do it right now, even though I don't, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And it's like I hyperfixate on it. And then it's like it's all I can think about until it's done. And then Lauren's like, why does it feel chaotic right now? And I'm like, because my brain literally will not stop thinking about it until I do it. Like it's like I have to redecorate the Golden Girl room right this second,
Yeah.
even though I have 4 sessions in 30 minutes, like back to back. And it's like,
Yep.
but oh, I don't know. That's what it made me think about, like now or not now. And it's like it always feels like now.
Well,
Always
but
Mhm.
that's
feels
like
like.
that sounds like impulsivity, and that also
Mhm.
sounds like hyperfixation, which are two traits, right? Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Am I about to like schedule a psychiatric?
I mean, I got a good provider if you need one. But yeah, I mean, it's things like that that I find to be extremely diagnostic, right? So like, I don't usually
Mhm.
this isn't an issue where I would like let's refer to the DSM-5, like no,
Mhm.
not really, not really. I
Yeah.
do like the assessments. I think the assessments are great, but I think a solid clinical interview is kind of where it's at with this. And honestly, I do think like if you asked every person that came in, what did you get nagged at from your mom when you were a kid? What does
Mm.
your partner dislike about you? And what do you struggle with at work or school? You could almost like, there you go. There it is.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm.
Because they tend to be lifelong struggles. You know what I mean?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, along that same line, like, how does it affect your relationships and work and daily life?
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So let's start with relationships. I think that someone who's constantly interrupting someone and unable to wait their turn in a conversation, and even some of the things that we just said, like that can get on someone's nerves, right? Like
Hmm.
those things impact relationships. They really do.
Right.
And sometimes ADHD people are really bad at managing money. Not all the time, but that's one of the things. Sometimes that's huge in a relationship, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it definitely affects relationships a lot, but I think a lot of it is the communication piece, you know?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
think like the impulsivity and wanting to say your piece, and and maybe like losing stuff all the time and having that kind of frantic energy when you're trying to find your keys and you're running late, or all of that I think impacts a relationship a lot.
Mm.
um I think being
Mm-hmm.
distracted is because that's sometimes our biggest gift to our partner is our attention, right?
Hmm.
If someone's having a hard time paying attention, right? Like it's just that's going to impact a relationship for sure. How could it not?
Oh my gosh, I'm having a visceral reaction to that. Because me and my husband were literally had a conversation about this in our last date night of like his short-term memory loss or, just forgetting stuff that I've said. And I'm like, I told him, I'm starting to realize now, like, that's about you and like how your brain works. And like,
Mm.
I'm realizing now, years later, like how your brain processes information. And I'm like, I literally have to wait and like make sure you're in a prime state or like you don't have a lot on your plate, or I'm gonna wait an hour until you get off of work, or like make sure you're like okay and fine, or you just finished eating or whatever. Like, certain times so that I know like you're listening, right?
Mm.
Or I'll like call his name and then I'm like, I'm gonna call your name again and then I'm gonna ask you to repeat what I just said. And I'm like, but my brain wants to interpret your forgetting or your memory loss as like something else, like, oh, I'm not important enough, or like, I'm not worthy enough. I'm like, that's what my brain does, but I know, like, I'm starting to remind myself it's not about me.
Nothing to
It's
do with that.
about,
It's about you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just how your brain is like zoom in and
Mm.
like it's the information's not sticking.
Mm.
It doesn't
He was,
stick. I mean, that's
yeah.
exactly right. I wish we had a better term for that. It is a short term.
Hmm.
It's like what is it called on the computer? It's like uh, working memory. No, that's a human thing. What is it
Mm.
called on the computer? You guys aren't talking about like
Uh,
the ability to have 12 windows open at one time. Do you remember when you guys are too young? You don't remember when computers would like freeze up when they didn't have enough like I don't know
Oh
if it's RAM.
no.
It might be
oh.
RAM,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it really is like that in humans, right? If you have
Yeah.
your windows open, you're not going to be
Yes.
able to do any, you can't do anything else. And so
Yes.
I know only old people are going to understand that because I remember when computers used to like lock up, they just didn't have enough like bandwidth
Yes.
to like manage, the way that our computers are now where we're doing like video
Hmm.
and have 12 windows open, like
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's modernize it then, right? On an iPhone, if you have too many apps open and you don't clear them out, things freeze up, they don't
Yeah.
work,
yeah.
your battery dies quicker. Like, and that's actually a really bad thing because I never close out my apps. So I don't know why I'm the one talking about this, but
No, my teenager gets my phone and just starts closing all my apps and he's like, you're
yeah.
killing your
And I'm
battery.
like, I don't even think about it. It's fine.
Yeah.
I've seen how many apps Aaron has had open at like one time, and I was like, this is wild. I didn't know this was possible.
I think that's diagnostic, y'all. I think it might be a little diagnostic. Do you have 30 apps open on your phone? Yes. Do you have 100 hobbies? Yes.
Hmm.
Do you have hobbies that you circulate like get obsessed with for like a month and then stop?
Oh,
That's yeah,
crocheting. Yeah,
yeah,
that was my most recent.
diagnostic. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Wow. Wow. I'm like, I feel like this podcast episode is just diagnosing me.
I feel on the spot. OMG.
So,
Oh,
but
Yeah.
again, like just because when someone learns about it and they go pursue a diagnosis doesn't mean that there's social contagion or that there's so many other people. It's like, what if you did? And here's the other thing too. Like the people that I know, that don't get diagnosed into well into adulthood have incredible like masking capabilities and incredible other ways like intelligence and creativity and all these other things that they can just sort of like compensate for their ADHD, which I hate
mm,
that it has to be compensated for, but in a world where, people might judge the way someone's desk looks or what time they get places, right? Or,
yeah.
how organized or unorganized someone is, like that's, yeah.
Yeah, well, it makes me think
Mhm.
of like the typical American work week, like 5 days,
Mhm.
8-hour days. Like that does not sound like it's gonna jam well
Mm-mm.
with someone like with struggling with ADHD, like trying to
But you know
manage
what
all the
does?
things.
You know what does? Like emergency room work, being a teacher, things that are creative,
Hmm.
things that are varied, being a police officer, like things like that, things where you can like, where like that kind of brain or that kind of ability to truly like carry all of these things at one time, really like a multitasking. Actually, I don't really think that exists, but that's another
Yeah.
conversation. But that ADHD people have this way of managing a lot of things at one time that
Mm.
makes them really incredible at certain jobs. Residential treatment, that's a thing. Like places like
Mm-hmm.
a hospital environment, places where there's 100 things going on.
Mm. Mm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And then here's another weird little asterisk that I'm going to put by that until that person gets overstimulated. And then and then it's so there is like a
Yeah.
perfect amount of sort of chaos that someone could operate in very effectively, like almost better than a
Mm.
neurotypical, I would say, until
Hmm.
they get overwhelmed, right?
Right.
If they're tired, sick, hungry, too many, like maybe a few too many things happening, then it's harder to manage all of that. And then it can get to the
Mm.
overwhelming point. Um,
Mm.
Mm. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
So with that being said, like how do like diet, exercise, and sleep play into managing not or like lessening or not getting overstimulated so intensely or so quickly?
I mean, probably out of all of those, sleep and eating, sleep and nutrition
Mm.
Sleep
are
and
probably the
eating.
two biggest things in that realm. So a lot of ADHD folks are going to struggle with sleeping. They're going to want to stay up really late and sleep late in the morning. That's a thing. Not
Mhm.
everyone, but a lot of people, that's a thing.
Mhm.
But kind of just to use my kids as my teachers thing again, like sleep studies, were a thing. We're part of our childhood. So we have, met with sleep doctors and sleep experts before. Um, and it's fascinating how like that makes such a big difference. So I really like, I'm a huge proponent of sleep hygiene, of a regular sleep schedule. Like, and I know that's really hard because I know we all work with college students and they're like the worst, they're the literal
Mhm.
worst with this. But
Mhm.
like it is critical. It's critical. You just can't manage your emotions the same way. You're going to get overstimulated. Like you're going
Mhm.
to forget more than you might normally. You know what I mean? Like it's just a lot of bad things are going to happen. And I know when my kids were little, like our doctors and sort of everyone that was helping with our children, um, stress the importance of protein so much, which I think is
Mhm.
interesting, because I know there's a lot of feelings people have about nutrition and nutritional advice in general, but we really followed that. So because our kids took medication, it was really important that we got them a ton of protein in the morning and a ton of protein at dinner because they hardly
Mhm.
ate during the day because the medicine curbed their appetite so much that they didn't eat. Um, and so we were just like really doing the protein just because of the protein's effect on the brain, and even
Yeah.
blood sugar being more stable, so it kind of protein kind of feeds
Mhm.
the brain and keeps blood sugar stable. So again, I'm like not a nutrition expert. This is just what I've been told and
Right.
kind of like seen and practiced along the way is that protein makes a
Mhm.
huge difference. It really does.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I've also heard like caffeine is like a good thing in this ADHD realm.
I think
And
if someone isn't taking medication, caffeine can be a pseudo substitute. I mean, it doesn't last
Mhm.
very long and it's got
hmm
some side effects too. But I do think a lot of people kind of manage their ADHD with caffeine and nicotine.
Caffeine.
Back in the day, it was nicotine. Like
Ah.
that was almost a diagnostic thing too. Does someone smoke cigarettes or not? Because that will tell you, a lot just because nicotine is such a great focus drug. It like
Yeah.
relaxes you
Mm.
and focuses you, but it's just terrible, right? Highly addictive, doesn't last very long, comes with a
Yeah.
butt ton of chemicals, so
Right.
hmm
it's not great to manage it, but that's what people are doing when they're medicating, right? They're like caffeine
Yeah.
and nicotine, man. That's like that gets people through lots of things.
I
Mm.
could say personally, I was definitely getting through my day with caffeine, like, and making it through and feeling accomplished and feeling successful, m like more frequently. But since there's now this baby in here and this belly,
Newsflash, listeners.
Ash is having a baby.
Yeah, she's
Um,
having a baby.
we can't do that
Mm-mm.
throughout the day. We
Right.
can't intake that much caffeine, but like just thinking about like or hearing that comment and then thinking about my own like pre-pregnancy self, I was like, wow, I really did like
Mm-hmm.
get through a lot of things and like felt good with all that caffeine. It was
Yeah.
flowing.
So there
Yeah.
might there might be a difference between what a neurotypical and a neurodiverse person are going to experience with caffeine.
Mm.
So I don't know that it necessarily would make anyone, it might make a neurotypical person more productive. I don't know if that's the
Mm.
case. It might make
Mm.
everyone more, what if it makes everyone more productive? And for the neurodiverse person or the ADHD person, it just sort of makes things a little quieter,
Mm-hmm.
hmm
the ability to kind of like focus and do one thing at a time. Because that's kind of what the
Mm-hmm.
medication
Yes.
does. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, like the endless to-do list wasn't always right here in my face. It was like over there. And I was like, okay, zoned in. Here, that's done. Next thing. That's done. Next thing.
Mm.
hmm
No,
Unless we were in traffic, that was a different story.
because
Houston traffic's crazy.
Ooh, Dallas isn't much better. But it is a little better, I would say. I think you guys win the traffic debate for sure. Um,
Yeah.
Also, let's really quickly, because you asked about exercise, so let's
Yeah.
really quickly, kind of go back to that. All right, so sleeping, nutrition, and exercise are going to be helpful for any mental health condition and, just a healthy lifestyle, right? Like they're going to be indicated for almost anything. You know what I mean? Like we just need to take
Mhm.
care of ourselves. Like that's kind of a base thing. But I will say with exercise particularly, like my daughter thankfully, was on swim team in high school because I'm telling you, if that kid was not in the water, she was not sleeping. So she had to get physically exhausted and then
Mm,
eat a ton of calories, right? That she just expended. So a ton of protein, a ton of calories. And then and only then was she able to sleep.
mm.
So for some people, that like level of physical exhaustion needs to happen in order for them to be able to just relax at the end of the day and turn the brain off, you know? Or maybe
Mhm.
it's not even that their brain is off, but their body is so tired that it's sort of overriding that like active brain. So, and I have had another friend of mine say that if her kid didn't get into water every day, that
Hmm.
ADHD was almost unmanageable, which I think is really interesting. I'm wondering what water actually does. I know it like compresses us and gives us like pressure on our body. So apart
Right.
from being exhausting physically to let's swim or whatever, if we're using that as our example, um, that I wonder if that compression like regulates something. You know, it probably does. I'm just going to go
Yeah.
with it. It probably does, but I think that's something. I think that's something too.
Mhm.
So there is a lot of like
Mhm.
regulation. I think that has to happen with this issue. I don't know if we're calling it an issue with this neurotype. Um, you know, there's like the regulation of like trying to fit into a world that expects you to do things a certain way, like in a
Right.
typical way. I think there's the piece that we haven't talked about is sort of like that irritability or that mood dysregulation that comes with it. It comes with
Mhm.
it with or
Oh
without
yeah.
medication. You know,
Yeah.
Yep.
like with
Mm-hmm.
if you're medicated, then when your medicine wears off, then you've got like mood fluctuations that happen. And if you're not medicated, then you're irritable because you've got 100 things open. And if someone's asking you 100 tabs open, right? Like, or apps open, and then
Mm-hmm.
someone asks you for other things, right?
Yeah.
It's, or if you want to hyper focus on something and someone's asking you to do something different or whatever, any of the things that can happen,
Mm-hmm.
throughout our days or whatever, that leads to some irritability,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
being overwhelmed in general leads to irritability, right? So if you
Mm.
again if you're having hyperactive thoughts and you're somehow not really able to get kind of go from point A to point B, kind of in any kind of way, that gets that gets frustrating, right? So then
Mm-hmm.
we got the irritability too.
Mm.
There's some of that stuff that happens too. Um,
Yeah.
and I know
Mm.
sometimes people have not too many, but I have had some people have the side effect of medication is that they get more anxious. They get really anxious from it because
Mm.
it's a stimulant, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that can happen as a side effect, which I'm usually really like when someone really needs medication and that's the side effect because I'm like, oh gosh, let's try the non-stimulant meds, but they don't tend to work as well, in my opinion or my experience, as the
Mm-hmm.
stimulant ones do. But anyway, we're getting, there's more medications that are being created all the time. There's one now
Mm-hmm.
where you take it at night and in the morning it's in your system. And I really could have used that when my kids were little,
Mm-hmm.
just because, like getting ready for school was just a nightmare. Oh my God, it
Oh
was just
yeah. I
wild,
can only imagine.
herding cats. So anyway, but like we got smarter as the time went on, and we would start to do things that I would suggest that a lot of adults do if they're going to take medication, which is, maybe set an alarm early, take the medication, go back to sleep. If you really need
Mm-hmm.
it to function, you know what I mean? Like that kind
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
of yeah, so we figured that out, but that was, that was rough for a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I do recommend medication to
Okay.
people. Not
Mm-hmm.
exclusively, it's not like for sure it's not the only thing I would say, that we're going to
Right.
use to treat it. But I am a fan of it, especially for this thing because it just like makes people feel immediately different and usually
Mm-hmm.
better, like
Mm-hmm.
immediately, like 30 minutes to an hour, and you're like, oh, I've got a new brain. Let me like get some stuff done.
Yeah.
Like it just it's so effective for most people. I don't know, a lot of people. I don't know what percentage of people. A lot of people, it's so effective immediately, and it helps them so much that it's almost worth all the other things that I just mentioned that could potentially happen. Apart from
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, we can't do that because I think people that have ADHD already struggle with a level of anxiety. And so I don't, if medication adds to that instead of takes it away, then that's not a good thing. But um,
Mm.
yeah, that's just another one of those things that I always say too. I should have like a things that I always say, a whole list of those. But that people with ADHD struggle with anxiety.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I got kind of confirmed by a psychiatrist that I used to work with that, she basically said, like, I've never seen anyone that had ADHD that didn't have anxiety with that. I've seen plenty of people that have anxiety that don't have ADHD, but never the other
Mhm.
way around.
Wow.
And my
Mhm.
experiences match that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and maybe don't look anxious, you know what I mean? But maybe just
Right.
have this like underlying thread of like, oh my God, don't forget to do this and blah, blah, blah. And like all just the herding cats that people are doing in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
So in addition to like medication and obviously therapy, because we're awesome therapists. What if someone is in therapy and wanting to address like the ADHD symptoms, what would they like talk to the therapist about specifically? Is like those specific like those buckets and their specific things in those buckets, or like where would they what would be a good place to start for them in therapy?
Mm.
I mean, I think, kind of what I said earlier, I think we have to address the self-esteem piece, right? So there has to be a lot of
Mhm.
work on acceptance and kind of management of the thing. I do
Mm.
think like a good referral to a good, you know, psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner that doesn't stigmatize people that are seeking that kind of medication, I think is really important. And there
Yeah.
is a lot of stigma about it. There's a lot of doctors that are asking people to take urine drug screens before they're allowed to get that medication, or they're having them take urine drug screens so that they can prove that they took the medication and they're not selling it. So I feel like that is a really stigmatizing thing. And I understand that doctors have to you know, their liability and their responsibility for people misusing things that they might prescribe. But like, I just, I don't know, I struggle with that. I
Yeah.
think like for a lot of medications, you don't have to be treated like a criminal. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I don't know why this has to be that different. But anyway, so I mean, going back to your original question, Ashley, I got off track a little bit, but like, so yeah, so like, the self-esteem piece, a good medication referral, and then you got to work on like some systems. And the systems need to change frequently because they don't always work, or ones that work sometimes don't work another time, or ones that work for some people don't work for other people. So there needs to be some type of a system for getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I hate to put any like focus on productivity because I feel like we're way too focused on that all the time anyway. But in this case, I mean, this disrupts people's work lives, like actually, and their schooling. So
Mhm.
it needs to be addressed with some kind of a system to manage what needs to be done, a task management system, if you will, or a prioritization system. What's
Mm-hmm.
important, what's not important, what's time sensitive, what's not time sensitive. That needs to be gone through on a daily basis, probably. And so a lot of times what I'm doing with people is helping them figure out what systems they're going to use. And a lot of times they
Mhm.
need to be visual, right? So it needs to be like post-its, or it needs to be writing on your bathroom mirror with a dry erase marker. It needs
Yeah.
to be things like visual reminders because there is that out of sight, out of mind component to this
Mhm.
too. And so if people aren't reminded, I think, using your phone alarm system, I think is brilliant. Like we should have alarms for lots of things, especially, things like remembering to take your medication. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's a
Mhm.
thing that might require an alarm. Um,
Yeah.
just not forgetting about things. Like so putting everything that's important in the calendar with reminders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't try to rely on your memory. Like don't do that. So I think the more systems we have in place with that, and I met some ADHD people that were wildly organized, but I think they learned early. Somehow they learned early to like that this is how I'm going to have to do college. And so
Mm-hmm.
if
Oh,
they learned
yeah.
in high school or whatever, they figured it out. And they come in and they got everything color coded and organized, and they got like, you know, tabs and binders, and they've got like it's just wildly organized. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
lots of systems, and they're not forgetting as much, I think, as maybe someone who doesn't have a system. But I mean, I've had plenty of people come in my office and like, yeah, I'm struggling with ADHD. And I'm like, okay, so what kind of systems do you have in place? And they're like, what? I'm like, you got to have systems. And they're like, what? What do you mean? And
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you remember to do anything? Like,
Right.
I don't. And I'm like, okay, so systems, we got to get some systems. So I do think that they can be different for everybody. I mean, I think different things work for different people. And I'm
Right.
certainly from my experience with my kids, they didn't always work all the time. You know what I mean? So we had to
Mm-hmm.
kind of shuffle through them. We had to be like, do we need visual reminders? Do we need auditory reminders? Do what like what? And kind of shuffle through them all like as necessary, right? So if
Right.
one stopped working, we could try a different one. Which again, that probably
Yeah.
sounds a little, that probably sounds weird, but they sometimes we got to do multiple things, and sometimes we have to like shuffle them around somehow. I don't know
Mm.
how else to say that. And I don't even know why it's that way. It just is that way, you know.
What are your like thoughts about like self accountability through like rewards or like consequences? Because some clients are coming in like,
Mm.
if I don't complete that thing, if I don't fill out my calendar, then I'm not gonna watch my favorite show, or I'm not gonna go have that like cup of ice cream. Like, or like they have something to look forward to, like, oh, like my group of friends is gonna go hang out, but like I want to hold myself accountable by getting this stuff done by this time so that I don't feel worry free, quotation marks, while hanging out with my friends.
Oh, okay.
I know.
I'm gonna I'm gonna start by saying that I think that that would work really well for a neurotypical person.
Okay.
I'm I don't know. I think it could work. I think it could potentially work with folks that have ADHD, but I don't think it would work the same way.
Okay.
I just don't think because
Yeah.
it's not a want to or it's not a discipline issue. We have to be careful that we're not falling into the if you have
Yeah.
discipline, then you can get through this. It's really not that. Although
No.
that doesn't hurt. Discipline helps in a lot of things. So I'm not anti-discipline for sure. Like, I mean, I think the people that I know that like apply their systems all the time have a tremendous amount of discipline, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's a measure of it, you know. But so I don't know. I think like maybe it's similar to how we talk to people when they have depression, where we're like, it's not your fault that you have it, but you need to do some things to help it, right? So maybe it's akin to that, where we're like, it's not your fault that you're struggling with this, but you got to do some things to help it. So
Mm.
maybe the accountability piece could be helpful in that sense. But I
Hmm.
would be cautious with that because I wouldn't want to, kind of add to that. They already feel like, their self-esteem has already been deeply impacted by their inability to be like everybody else. Right. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to somehow inadvertently play into that. Right.
Hmm.
Especially as a therapist, I wouldn't want to be like, well, you just need to try harder, or you just need,
No. Yeah.
you just need to like reward yourself. You need to hold yourself accountable and get that done, because that's not really what the issue is, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I think I think that works. I mean, that's something that, I do with myself, is if I get a certain amount of things done, I get a reward, you know, so that works for me. You know what I mean? But
Hmm.
it didn't work for my kids. And I
Yeah.
don't know if they weren't mature enough. Maybe their brain wasn't mature enough to, get a reward later, like that delayed gratification, like that might not have registered in their now, not now brain. Right.
Mm. Hmm. I know it doesn't work for me. Like rewards do not work for me. I'm just like,
Oh.
it's okay.
I have asked for accountability in certain aspects of my job. I've
Hmm.
directly asked that of a supervisor to be like, you need
Hmm.
to hold me accountable because if I know you're going to, then I will do it. You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So
Well,
accountability works.
yeah.
It just can't be shameful. It has to be delivered in a
Mm.
certain way.
Well,
You know?
that kind of like makes me feel some type of way about deadlines and when assignments are due, because I know this assignment is due at this day, or I'm going to take this exam at this day, and I only have this one time to do it. And if I fail it, or if I get a bad grade, now I'm ashamed. I didn't study as long as I could have, or I didn't like, you know, address my testing anxiety, or like how I was during the test. And like, it's like very much a fear type of feeling. Like I'm afraid that, or I can't trust myself to show up the way I want to show up. And I only have this one opportunity to,
Mm.
you know,
That's really tricky. That's really tricky because that can't
it's
be
so
avoided,
tricky.
especially in school settings, right? Which is where we're all dealing, all of our clients are in school. So yeah, that's so tricky.
In the moments I've worked with clients with that, like we leaned into like the power of the procrastination, like you end up getting like a B plus, or like, you know, you didn't fail, you know, you're still in the program. Um, like, can we like lean into that? Like, you still showed up, you still did the thing, like you were still focused. But it's really hard when it's like, I have this set deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's, some perfectionism that would need to be addressed there too. And that seems weird to me that the ADHD people struggle with perfectionism, but that's a thing. Um, because it's like it's almost with that brain, it's going to be really hard to do certain things perfectly, And so it just seems like a nasty cycle. But
Hmm.
so I do think that that stuff can be addressed pretty effectively, I think, in counseling, things
Hmm.
like self-compassion. Um,
Yes.
honestly, I think mindfulness is probably one of the things that we talk about in counseling all the time. And I think it's probably one of the best things you can do for ADHD is to practice some of that. And I don't mean be expert at it and be able to sit on a cushion and meditate for an hour without thinking of anything but your breath. I don't mean that, but I just mean the ability to sort of like refocus your brain that wants to do lots of different things.
Hmm.
I think we can sometimes get better at that or like exercise that muscle. Um,
Yeah. I
so
definitely like to bring up that in um like explore different like the like small measurable ways to help my clients practice that more of like how about when we're eating lunch and we want to scroll or like we've had lunch with our friends 5 times this week. Maybe we just have it by ourselves or we just sit around each other and not talk and we're just like literally taking in every single flavor
Mm-hmm.
of what of like our first couple bites, and then after the first couple bites full throttle, like, but it doesn't have to be every single time,
mm,
just like, oh, being more intentional about like being in the moment, being present in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard though when your brain's going a mile a minute.
it is, but like that,
So
those are the people
hard.
who need to do it the most, probably, honestly.
Hmm.
Like at least some of the time, maybe not all
Yeah.
the time. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people, like adults with ADHD, that like forget to eat and stuff, like forget to eat, forget to drink water, right? And so then I'm like, well,
So
like if
guilty of
if
that.
we tune in a little bit, you know what I mean? If we have just a moment of mindfulness, like checking with our
Hmm.
bodies, we can be like, oh, when was the last time I had some water? Or like yeah, so I think it's like necessary and critical and, probably especially with ADHD, but especially with just our society right now, it's just so easy to be so distracted. It's just
Mm-hmm.
so easy. It just
Yeah.
is, I mean, we
Very.
pick up our phone and, be
Hmm.
distracted 100 different ways. So yeah, I do
Yeah.
think mindfulness is something, you know, that's probably again like exercise, like sleep, like nutrition. It's probably up there with like this would be helpful for anyone to do this, but I think
Hmm. Hmm.
especially folks with ADHD. And again, not in a way to be perfectionistic or to be any kind of anything, but just like you said, just like tune into a few bites, check in with your
Hmm.
body, make sure you've had water, get up and move a little bit if you've been studying for a long time, that kind
Yeah.
of a standing desk is a revelation. You know what I mean? Like
Love
Hmm.
that.
sitting
Hmm.
on a yoga ball when you're studying or when you're, doing anything. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
Right.
Are
Yeah.
there any other like strategies or routines that you could describe are helpful to manage the symptoms?
yeah. I mean, I do think that there's some apps that are helpful, that are, and I think more are being invented all the time, right? But there's a couple. I mean, there's one called Focus Time that clients have used, and um, interestingly, I have it on my phone, but probably never used it. Which not all systems work for everybody, Um, but I do think two specific things that I think are really helpful. Again, they don't work for everybody, but for a lot of people, the Pomodoro method. It's
Hmm.
super, super helpful. So just like setting a timer for 15 or 20 minutes, setting goals for that time, really focusing in on what needs to happen in that 15 minutes. It's a smaller chunk of time to start with. Gives you a task, right? For a certain amount of time. That is really helpful for people a whole lot of the time, actually. I think that's helpful for people that don't have ADHD, but I think it's really helpful with people that do. And I also think body doubling is probably the super secret, not even secret, but the secret weapon, I guess is what I mean to say. like
Yes.
that body doubling is everything. I had a
Mm-hmm.
student tell me, a TW student tell me that I don't know that I know my material until I'm with a group of my peers and I'm explaining it to them. And I was like, what? Like
Mm-hmm.
your part of your studying is saying that out loud to your group? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, wow, that's brilliant. Do that all the time.
Yep.
Do
Mm-hmm.
that as much as
Yes.
they'll let you, you know?
Right.
Um,
Right.
because that's like I don't know, it was like a different part of the brain and it was they were learning it differently. You know what I mean? They were like reading
Mm-hmm.
it and trying to process it, but it only actually clicked until they were speaking it. Right. So
Mm.
things like that. But body doubling is like one of my very favorite things. I suggest that with anyone. And even with anxiety, with people that are like having like some kind of procrastination or some kind of trouble getting started because of their anxiety or ADHD, just go sit with a friend, go sit in a coffee shop, get on a Zoom
Mm-hmm.
call with someone and like do your work together. Like borrowing from someone else's presence and attention is a total strategy. And it works
Mm,
a lot of the time. I've only had a couple people be like, I can't really work with other people because they distract
right.
me. And I'm like, well, that makes sense, but
Yeah.
yeah. But most of the time I think it works in the sense that it actually helps them focus.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm very excited, listeners, that Miriam has incorporated body doubling in our work as therapists and given us a space. Like it's once a month, right? Like where we get
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do it together. And I'm really excited to try it because I don't know, I feel like I'm sure like I've done work like with just sitting around with other people, but I can't think about that because then it feels like anxious in a way of like, ooh, like, do I feel like I need to like fill the silence, right? Like, and talk. And so I'm really excited to like challenge myself with this and be like, no, like, you just sit there and you're just doing what you need to do, but in the presence of people. So,
We're a chatty group, so I don't know what we're gonna do. We're just everyone mute yourself. We're not talking. This is not
yeah.
social. I don't know. That's really hard. But like,
Quiet
yeah,
time for 5 minutes and then
Yeah.
we could talk.
get done what you said you're getting done. Yeah. Um, yeah, body doubling is really, really, I mean, I can't even tell you the mechanism of why that is so incredibly helpful. But I mean, even my kid cannot clean their room unless someone is sitting in the room with them. So a lot of
Really?
times it has
Mm.
to be a friend. I'm like, call your friend. The room's getting out of control. Call your friend, have them come sit with you, listen to music and talk and get it done. And they're like, okay. And that's exactly what they do. Like that room has never been cleaned unless there's another person sitting there.
Oh
So
my gosh, that is so funny.
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
and it's super effective. And like again, the mechanism from that is that the person with ADHD is borrowing, like it's because I don't know if they're borrowing attention or if it's more of an accountability piece, like someone's watching me do this, so therefore
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do what I'm not sure what the mechanism is, but it works, whatever it is. It absolutely
Yeah.
works. I know
It's
we
your yeah. It's
well
reminding
we
me of like cleaning, like in my family, like we're all cleaning at the same time. Like it goes by faster. I'm not angry. Like everyone's like, "Oh, we're getting this done."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a sense of belonging almost like,
Yeah. Yeah. Like a community effort kind of.
yeah, like we're
Yeah.
all in this together.
High School Musical.
Yeah.
We're gonna insert that song right now. But it makes me think too of like thinking about like all the different volunteer opportunities, right? Like how many people would just be like, you know what? I see this highway is like got a lot of trash on it, so I'm just gonna go and clean it up, right? Versus like if you volunteer, right? Like more people like the aspect of we're doing it like as a community and like it feels more, I don't want to say like rewarding, but maybe like beneficial in the sense of like you're getting to have that connection point, right? And belonging with a group of people, but also like you're doing something, like you're productive in a sense. So I don't know, maybe it's like that too. I
I'm
don't know,
sure
that could be a whole
sure
tangent.
that's yeah, I'm sure that's a benefit to it too, right? Yeah, just the togetherness and community. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's like lots of I sometimes I'm like, why does this work so well? I'm just
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure it out. But I think like and I know like in school we use the term like borrowing someone's ego strength. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I remember one of my professors talking about that, and I feel like that maybe applies in this situation too. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
really, really effective. And I do think that's maybe one of the reasons why there's so many people working in coffee shops these days. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it. Like studying, I
Mhm.
don't know if I could handle all the noise.
No, it's like I think it helps people with ADHD because they can tune that out and then focus on what they need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mhm.
distraction of that, just I don't know, it does something positive.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's not negative, it actually does
Yeah.
something positive. It's like because there's a distraction, I'm going to focus more.
Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, we could talk about this all day.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, we really could. And I just, I don't know if there's other things that we need to talk about, um, that we haven't gotten to, or if this feels like
Mm-hmm.
kind of covered. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, but I
Yeah,
don't know.
We have.
we
Yeah.
have.
I feel like maybe a good wrap-up question, and Ash, like if you feel like this is good, is just like what do you wish people knew about ADHD that they often don't? Maybe like if you had, I feel like it's hard to narrow down one thing, but like if you have like a big old golden nugget to give our listeners of like the biggest takeaway.
It's going to be a big old run-on sentence. Okay, let's go. It's going to be, it's going to be, it's not a lack of discipline. It's a way of being. People that have this brain are incredibly productive and contribute to society in so many ways, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that it's not a disorder, it's just a way of being, just a neurotype. What else would I want to say? Yeah, like it's not a lack of discipline. People are going to be like this their whole life. It's the way they are. It's the way
Mm-hmm.
they are. The way someone's wired. Uh,
Mm.
What would like be like a run-on sentence or like a phrase to like kind of laser beam the self-esteem, the self like
Ooh.
um, you know, the
yeah.
self-esteem like stuff that
Okay.
gets
Let me try. Let me try.
eroded.
Putting
I
her on the
think I
spot.
think some of it. I think some of it's going to be the kind of the same thing that we'd want the neurotypicals to know, right? Like
Mm.
this is not because you're undisciplined, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is not because you're not intelligent. It's not because something's wrong with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just
Mhm.
have to work with this brain and get its attention so that it can hyper focus on something that we need it to. It's kind of an attention based nervous system. That's kind of how I look at it too. And so I think getting its attention is probably what we need to do and get it to focus that way. Um, but it's not like a moral failing. That's what I feel like people feel so bad about it. And I used to too.
Right.
Just feel so bad about my inability to organize the way that neurotypicals can. It just
Mm-hmm.
made me feel horrible. And people would
Right.
say stuff to me at work. People would make fun of my desk, and stuff like that. And I'm like, do you think I want it to look like? I mean, like this is how this is, like
Hmm.
it's not that I have a preference of having 12 stacks of stuff that's on my desk, it's just sort of how it is. So yeah, so I think a lot of acceptance, a lot of self-compassion, a lot of like, you're not broken. This is just the way you are, and you've got tons of
Mm-hmm.
gifts, anyway, and we don't all have to be the same. We just don't all have to be the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. That's a great thing to end on. We don't all have to be the same.
Yeah. Can we make that the quote of the episode?
Yes,
Miriam
neurodiversity is
Reynolds.
a good thing. Neurodiversity in any is
Mm-hmm.
a good thing, right? Just like,
Right.
yeah, and all of us having different brains is a really good thing. It's a really
Yeah.
good thing. It just doesn't always feel.
Yes. I love that. I think that's a great place to wrap up and a good, just like summary point of this wonderful episode. So thank you, Miriam.
Thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much, Miriam.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah,
Give me the opportunity to talk about this subject that I love so much.
of course. And please come back at any given opportunity, you
Anytime
know?
you guys invite me, I'll be back.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much, wonderful listeners. As we wrap up this episode, we appreciate you always for tuning in. Stay tuned next month for another episode, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.